Warning, this podcast contains heavy spoilers for not just one movie, but entire franchises. We highly recommend going and watching these movies before listening to us as a companion piece that stitches all the timelines into one creepy, crime-ridden story. There will be no more spoiler warnings. We do not break character. After this, there is no turning back. You've been warned. Hit the music.
You are talking about the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's
This is not my joke. I got this from Reddit from a guy called Worldly Replacement 63. It's 3 years old. So
Okay,
I don't
maybe
know.
I've heard it.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Guy walked into a bar with a monkey. The monkey grabbed some olives off the bar and ate them. Then he grabbed some sliced lime and ate them. He then jumped onto the pool table and grabbed one of the balls. To everyone's amazement, he stuck it in his mouth and somehow swallowed it whole. The bartender looked at the guy and said, "Did you see what your monkey just did?" "No, what?" "He just ate the cue ball off the pool table whole." "Yeah, that doesn't surprise me," replied the man. "He eats everything in sight. Don't worry, I'll pay for the cue ball." The guy finished his drink, paid his bill, paid for the stuff the monkey ate and left. 2 weeks later, the guy came back and had his monkey with him. He ordered a drink and the monkey started running around the bar. The monkey found a cherry on the bar. He grabbed it, stuck it up his butt, pulled it out, and then ate it. Then the monkey found a peanut, and again, stuck it up his butt, pulled it out, and ate it. The bartender asked, "Did you see what that filthy ape just did?" "No, what?" asked the man. "Well, he stuck both a cherry and a peanut up his arse, then he pulled it out and he ate them." "Yeah, that doesn't surprise me," replied the guy. "He'll eat anything, but ever since he had to shit out that cue ball, he measures everything first." Hello and welcome to It's a Live Alive podcast. This is a true crime, paranormal, interstellar podcast covering unbelievable stories that sound like they were ripped straight from the pages of a Hollywood script. I'm your host, the man of many names, the outlaw, Harley Ray, the bruiser, bronzer, doctor, HR, smoking steam, THC, or you can call me Josh for short. And with me, as always, is my very own scream queen, the perfect combination of beauty and brains, the bride of smoking steam, the horror expert, guts and gore, the gorgeous, the sexy Aimee Rose.
Hi, I just hit my head.
Eventually, if I do that fast enough, I can just be like, "Aimee Rose," and no one will know any different.
You'll be like,
say the words
an
properly
auctioneer.
again. So, how close are we to packing our bags and joining Apeology?
That way. Not close. That way.
Just like The Simpsons, and they followed the leader. We'd have to give them our house.
You would have to have a screw loose to want to be an apologist.
Right, I suppose, look, this is episode 3. We're not going to waste any time. Let's just get straight into this fucking story.
Okay.
Dig right back in. Because when we left it last week, we were talking about how Zaius was about to lose it all to a whistleblower's reports to the police and FBI. The whistleblowers in question, Valentina and Vida Zaius, the daughter and son-in-law of Dr. Ulysses Zaius. Vidas took her name in marriage because of the Zaius name being such a big deal in apology, and Zaius himself was hell-bent on the name and bloodline living on.
Should have thought about that before choosing to start a family in your 50s.
True. Now, as I said in our last episode, Valentina had no real interest in her father's far-fetched stories of intelligent apes and superhuman men, and chose to spend her time working with the teams that made up the Animal Sanctuary Department of Apeology. It was for that reason she was left out of the inner circle, and a different successor was chosen in John Wesley McCullough, a lifelong apeologist who was chosen as a teen for his discipline and dedication to the church. McCullough, who was born in 1961, was one of the first members of Apeology getting in on the ground floor when his parents joined. They were the kind of people who were known for jumping from the latest fad fringe religions, one to the other. Only thing is, when they left for a newer, more mellow cult 15 years later, their son McCullough, by then almost constantly by Zaius' side, would stay put, leaving them behind, saying they were an unnecessary distraction, a joke, considering their flakiness and inability to commit.
Okay.
That's the crazy thing here, right? they're like two crazy hippies stuck in an acid trip, and he's like Mr. Military Man, strict, disciplined, and with a very definite and defined set of morals. Bad morals, but morals.
Okay.
So when her father's successor in place and the eyes of the church off her, Valentina was able to focus on her work that really mattered, and that was the management and running of the church's various ape sanctuaries situated around the world. Now, I said last week that Valentina usually ignored questions related to the church's teaching and would usually instead choose to focus on the apes and the sanctuaries. But as testing on Kalima Island continued throughout the Kalima, I keep getting that fucked up. I keep about saying Kamala, like Camilla Parker fucking Bowles Island. But as testing on Kalima Island continued throughout the 80s and into the 90s, more and more families were coming forward with worrying allegations about experiments being performed on followers on the now infamous Ape Island. Allegations that were becoming too hard for Valentina and her husband to ignore. She said that a deep dive one night on the internet led to her asking her father a few questions. He told her at that point that the allegations were lies and acts of heresy by disgruntled defectors.
Yeah.
This was not enough to satisfy Valentina, who, despite not being in the inner circle, had complete clearance to move her own HQ on Kalima Island. Well, at least enough clearance to get into any office or get her hands on any files. Zaius never thought that a trader would come from inside his own family, so he never thought to restrict her clearance.
Yeah.
Valentina was only really restricted from the labs, and that's because Zaius knew that if she saw the treatment of the apes and humans alike, that she just wouldn't understand, and in turn, she'd never look at her father the same way again.
Yeah.
And he was right, because once she saw all the official documentation, some of which she made fast copies of, she went straight to the law and the press, and the secrets of Ape Island were suddenly becoming public knowledge.
So if he didn't see it coming, then the FBI must have gotten shitloads of evidence against him.
No. While he didn't see the betrayal coming, he still had Apeologists within the NYPD and FBI. And as soon as Valentina and Vidas began talking, he was contacted. Remember, it's called Ape Island. Island being the important part here. With the early warning and convenience of having a body of water between him and the mainland, Zaius was able to destroy anything extremely incriminating, and then he took off in his yacht with his top advisors for international waters.
Fucking weasel. How long did he last at sea before he had to come back to land and face the music?
He would stay at sea until his death in January of 2019.
Thank fuck. Imagine if he'd lasted another year. He'd be walking around like the second coming of Christ if he had lived to see the prophecy come true. Kind of. Not really.
Yeah, it's not really his prophecy, but the similarities are creepy. The leading ape being Caesar, named Caesar, the virus being labeled the Simian flu. He would have been fucking delighted with himself. Because you know these kind of religious types, he'd have been able to bend that into his...
Oh, definitely.
He bent enough fucking shit into his story. Like, I mean, those fucking astronauts from the 1971 crash, or 70 crash, he managed to turn that into 3 apes fucking coming back in time. To warn us of our fucking future. So in the aftermath of the raids, Ape Island was confiscated by the FBI and a warrant for the arrest of Zaius was issued. In this time, Zaius distanced himself from McCullough to protect him, as he needed him in a very particular position if he was going to be useful to him in the ever-nearing doomsday apocalypse. Go-betweens were used to convey orders and reports, but the two men would not meet again after the raids in the 90s. Well, at least not publicly.
You said last week that they really took a hit in the membership numbers after the raids. Like, what way were they now at this point when he's a known fugitive?
Yeah, the numbers are low, like maybe 150 to 200,000 worldwide. But they were hardcore members. They saw Zaius as a martyr and believed in his work so much that they embraced his diabolical research as being for the greater good. I'm not just talking about any Joe Soap either. This was coming from influential megastar celebrities.
Okay.
So even with the numbers down with the regular man, the moneymakers were still latching on and even doubling down on Dr. Zaius' mad theories, or prophecies as they would call them. Zaius would pretty much spend the rest of his life preaching from Zoom to his followers while being pampered on a yacht. Resigned to accept that his research to find the missing link to telekinetic superhuman powers was doomed to fail. Who'd have thought?
Yeah.
He did try over the years to rehabilitate his image and the church's image through various covert special operations executed by McCullough, but we'll get into that a bit later when we focus a little closer in on the former cardinal.
Okay.
Unfortunately for Dr. Ulysses Zaius, nothing could rehab the damage he had done, and as I said, his quest for immortality was cut short in January of 2019 when he passed away in his yacht from a massive stroke at the age of 96.
Well, they do say the good die young, so it makes sense that he would live well into his 90s.
Now, you have to understand that the entire basis of apology is centered around the prospect of superhuman telekinetic power and the ability to live for thousands and thousands of years. So, that being said, 96 isn't all that old, and the leader of the church passing on when he claimed he could, become close to immortal wasn't the best look going forward. So, to double down on his prophecy propaganda even more, he had prepared a video and a statement ready to release upon his passing. The video depicted Zaius with some heavy and cheap CGI entering a spacecraft similar to the one described in the first book, The Planet of the Apes. In the video, Zaius revealed that he was the man in the first story and that he used George Taylor as a pseudonym until he was ready to make his big reveal. He claimed that the Planet of the Apes story was sent back in time thousands of years by the way of the Simian Scrolls, which he would later translate from Simian to human English and use as the source of his books and teachings. He said the scrolls informed him that he had to get on this spacecraft on this exact date in order to see the prophecy fulfilled, and for the Apeologists to have their sanctuary in the new ape civilization, while non-believers would burn in the atomic bomb or become slaves to the new intelligent ape overlords.
And I suppose this is the first time this extremely important date was ever mentioned within his teachings.
Yep, pretty much. But he covered his arse there by saying he had to keep it a secret to stop any outsiders like the US government from intervening and stopping his destiny.
You can't talk to one-minded hardcore religious people. Like, they'll have a ridiculous answer for every question and you'll never sway them from that belief.
And the Apeologists far and wide believe this shit as well. In fact, if you ask one of the few left today, they will tell you that Zaius is alive and well on Soror, waiting to usher his people into the ape paradise. Now, more than just a defender of the faith, Zaius in death became the lawgiver, and his teachings would evolve through the new defender of the faith, JW McCullough.
Oh, fuck's sake.
So, that's the end of the story for Dr. Ulysses Zaius, but who he left in power after him would overshadow his own tainted legacy as he led the religion with his doomsday militia group in a battle for the planet. This unsanctioned terrorist military unit going by the name Exercitus Viri waged war on apes across the land after the outbreak of the 2019 pandemic.
But how did we get there? Like, how does it go from religion to militia so fast?
You're Irish and you have to ask that? I mean, it wasn't that gradual. I mean, the raids were in the 90s. The militia didn't go on a rampage until nearly 30 years later.
Yeah.
But that just means we got 30 more years of crazy to dig into. So next, let's have a good old look at former US Special Ops Colonel John Wesley McCullough.
Okay.
Patreon is alive, alive, live, alive, live, alive. Patreon is alive, alive, horror podcast. Patreon is alive, alive, live, alive, live, alive. Patreon is alive, alive, horror podcast.
Hey kids, can't get enough of that blood, guts and gore? Then head on over to our Patreon, where for just $5 a month you'll get exclusive access to our true crime show Real Monsters and horrific history tales from Playing with Bones with Aimee Rose, along with early access to our minisodes and ad-free access to everything else. All this and loads more horror-tastic extras from the Horrorverse. So what are you waiting for? Permission? Go nick your parents' card today and subscribe now at patreon.com/It's Alive Alive Pod. Remember, that's It's Alive Alive Podcast, a really, really fake true crime horror podcast. It's Alive Alive, all the guts and gore with none of the guilt.
So we already covered the fact that McCullough and his family were there pretty much from day one of the church's formation. It's believed his parents met Zaius at a book signing / recruitment drive, and after a brief conversation, the gullible couple were going ape for this new religion. This was actually pretty common. Once the evolution theory and the quest for the superhuman was discredited, he had pretty much set his mind on building a new belief system from his work. His book tour for Beneath the Planet of the Apes was really just a veil for the recruitment and preaching tour he was really on. McCullough thrived from an early age in apology. He was bright, he was attentive, he was quick and eager to learn more, and he had a discipline that he could only have developed through the church because his parents sure weren't going to instill that skill in him. Now, that's not to say that he had an easy rise in the church. When I say his parents were flaky hippies, they were really fucking more flaky hippies. Like, think Flanders' parents in the cinema. Or in Simpsons cinema. What the fuck am I saying? Simpsons. So much so that they got labelled with the worst nickname of all within the church. They were referred to as Gibbons. Oh. Gibbons were a class within the church that were seen as pawns.
Okay.
They were unimportant followers who were often given the shit jobs to do and milked for cash. Basically, the Gibbons helped fund the church.
Please tell me this stops here, right? Like, they don't give all the different classes within the church stupid primate names.
No, that would be stupid. Zaius would be spinning in his spacecraft if he heard you talk about a class system within his church. The silly nicknames or code names, as Zaius like to refer to them, are ranks.
Of course there.
So, bottom rank or citizen rank would be given. These people generally worked in the sanctuaries and spread the word of Zaius in the process. They also, as we stated earlier, coughed up 50% of their income, so a high given count was necessary to keep the church afloat day to day. Chimps were the ground floor workers and researchers on Kalama Island. They generally had more perks than a gibbon within the religion, but not by much. They were seen as essential in furthering the research of Zaius, even if they had no idea what they were working on. Bonobos were the top level of followers, the celebrities, the top earners, the ones who handed you 50% of $1 million contracts every year, and the ones who never really felt the suffering of the gibbons and chimps. After them, there was the military wing made up of guerrilla units, and they were headed by generals known as Great Apes. Last was Zaius' top advisors. They were the orangutans, and they were the insulation around the Defender, the Fate, and eventually the Defender and the Lawgiver.
Okay.
Basically, to get to Zaius, you had to go through them.
Okay.
McCullough entered the guerrilla program at 15, much to his mellow parents' disappointment. Hippies are a passive breed, apparently.
Well, pity no one thought to tell that to the Manson family.
Manson was the nail in the coffin. Fuck me.
Coffee?
The nail in my coffee. Now that'll piss me fucking off. You're drinking your coffee first in the morning, you get a nail, fuck you.
What type of nail is it?
Oh, if it's a fingernail.
That would piss me off even more.
I'd prefer to have a rusty nail in there, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Manson was the nail in the coffin of the 60s hippie movement. I'm sure we'll profile him on Mini Monsters and discuss the family on Real Monsters someday. Over on Patreon, only $5 a month, first 7 days free, so we'll leave them for another day.
Shameless plug.
We have more than enough to discuss already today, so we'll leave old Charlie, Uncle Charlie, to the side for a little while.
Okay.
It was in the guerrilla program that McCullough truly started to shine and get attention from the Great Apes, who in turn passed his progress along to the orangutans. I said before that Zaius was tipped off about the raid of Kalama by the Apeologists within NYPD and FBI, but those were not the only double agents he had in influential positions. There was also at least 5 politicians and 1 judge who were bonobos of the church. All this was great, having people in power to clear the way for apology on a national and even international level, but he wanted to have men within the US military, a special operations unit that he could have amongst the soldiers, spreading his word, sowing the seeds of a possible apocalypse, and all in the meantime taking on highly treasonous operations in the name of the Defender of the Fate and the greater good of humanity.
What could he possibly have them doing?
Remember, this is the late 80s, early 90s. People are just coming to grips with computers in the office on a very basic level. And records and reports are still commonly kept in physical files, which were boxed and locked in government storage. The special secret guerrilla unit was generally used to break into these storage facilities and tasked with destroying negative records and reports against the apology or any high-ranking members. Later, they would have to get the hackers into the buildings to do their job, then leave, which added an extra stress to the job because any apologist high enough on the power scale to know of these sort of missions even existing and holding the skill to hack were generally computer nerds with no real military or action experience. I mean, let's face it, right? You may think it's a stereotype, but generally in the 90s, if you could do anything with a computer, you were a computer whiz. And if you knew everything about computers, it's because you spent all your time learning about it and never really went outside much. Not that it's a bad thing. I generally hung out with these kids, but, you know, the stereotype kind of exists from the 90s TV show. It exists for a reason. You know?
So why not just pay off some mercenary hacker or something?
They never used outsiders. Not worth the risk, and Zaius was hardcore on that. Like I said, his only downfall here is in regards to believing his family will be loyal to him no matter what.
Okay.
But what you say does make sense. So much so that McCullough thought the same thing, and showing his worth and his ever-growing value, the computer-illiterate army man found time to learn the skills necessary to take on that role, minimizing risks on ops as he eliminated the need for the weakest link, the tech guy.
So this brings him to the attention of Zaius.
Sure did. This dedication and commitment to his belief was truly impressive and earned him a dinner and medal from the top guy himself, who at this stage realised he was in need of a new successor. Valentino was out, and the so-called orangutans he had surrounded himself had devolved into nothing more than a bunch of sycophant yes-men. At this dinner, McCullough again impressed the then defender of the faith with his knowledge of faith and Zaius' teaching. He listened attentively as Zaius droned on and on about the future and the origin of the Simian Scrolls. They got on so well that they met again the next night, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the night after that, and that, and that. In fact, from this point on until his death in 2019, Zaius and McCullough would speak every day, early on face-to-face or by phone, later by go-betweens and coded messages.
So Zaius knew fairly early on that this was his guy, his eventual successor.
Yeah, but he didn't let McCullough know that till much later. Zaius decided, due to his thriving military career as well as his thriving religious work, that McCullough would learn best and be best served to the church if he stayed in his official military position until the time was right to have him gradually come in and take the aging doctor's place, at least publicly. He wasn't going to give up power of this thing to anybody until he was dead and launched into space.
So even with his secret special ops work for Zaius, he was still seen as a good military man by the US Army.
Oh yeah, he wasn't seen as good, he was seen as the best. And he was, he became one of the youngest colonels of his time, and he did all that while taking and altering government records and reports for his true overlord, Dr. Zaius. He would stay in power throughout the 90s Apeology scandal and the 2000s and 2010s legal battles with Zaius and the church, all while still proudly referring to himself as a committed and practicing member of Apeology. In this time, he would also meet his wife Maggie through a church function, and they would marry, and in 2015 they welcomed John Jr. into the world. Over the decades, McCullough learned from Zaius, and like those close to the doctor before him, believed every word out of the aging Messiah's mouth. And up until the raids and the following legal issues, he followed the belief system to the letter. In his mind, if Zaius said it, it was gospel, literally.
So the way you worded that tells me that he had a change of heart sometime after the law got involved.
Sort of. We mentioned earlier that once Zaius hit the high seas, he pretty much resigned himself to retirement, at least in terms of his research. This sudden lack of motivation was not lost on McCullough, who also began to feel the weight of the prophecies on his back. He surmised that with Zaius out of the game, then the great apocalypse was inevitable, and whether he was right in his assumption or not, the colonel began to believe that he was made successor to the defender of the faith for that very reason. In his mind, and the mind of all Apeologists, only Zaius knew how to crack the secrets of the ape mind. And if he had given up, then the experiments were fruitless. And if the prophecies were true, then the next step was ape domination.
So he thought Zaius chose him to lead them in a war for the planet as opposed to choosing him to continue his research into telepathy.
Yeah. But all notes and reports would actually show that this was Zaius' only hang-up about McCullough. Apparently, the one gripe Zaius had with his successor was that on more than one occasion, McCullough did ask why they were going to so much trouble when they could just kill all the apes before they got smart.
Like the old conundrum, if you had a time machine, would you go back and kill baby Hitler? And he was a big old yes on the kill baby Hitler side.
I'd wait for Hitler to be a teenager, then hang out with him for a little while, and by the end of the day, I'll happily take an axe to his skull for you, and he'd still be too weak to stop me. Problem solved.
Why would you wait for him to be a teenager?
Because then I wouldn't feel guilty. Feel guilty killing the baby. I don't feel guilty about killing the teenager. Fuck the teenager. He's a little prick. Drive an axe in his head and send him on his way.
Alright, Josh.
He's still weak. You got him.
Christ.
And he's a snotty little fucker at the same time, so you're like, fuck him.
Yeah.
So whether it was mixed messages from the go-betweens in the later years or just McCullough hearing what he wanted to hear, that was the direction he planned to take Apeology in the event his mentor couldn't get his side of the job done.
Which he didn't.
No. And had he more time to prepare after taking the top spot in the church, maybe things in the early 20s would have been very different. Because obviously with Zaius passing in January and the work involved with making the switch official from one defender to the next and all the pomp and circumstance that go into the changing of the roles and the promotion of Zaius, it was late January before McCullough could really enact any of his newly gained power.
And that brings us back to where we started with the Caesar, AOZ 113 and the pandemic.
Exactly. Colonel J. Wesley McCullough was one of the many military experts brought in to deal with the Great Ape Escape or Great Ape Uprising.
But you said he was a proud apeologist, open in his belief and practices. Like, surely his superiors would know that this man is the wrong man to send into this situation.
He had a spotless and stellar background, and to anyone outside of apeology, it seemed like he was completely impartial with his decision-making, working with facts, intel, and military tactics to achieve any and all goals set for him. He was the man who made the call that day to open fire on the apes just before they made their final break for the mighty redwoods. And he will be reprimanded for making this unsanctioned call. The plan had always been to sedate the apes unless in a position of extreme self-defense. The government wanted these apes for testing. They had pumped enough money into Genesis military-grade ALZ that they weren't willing to give up on the investment without a fight. This would be McCullough's last act as a US colonel.
Fuck me, like, where's the loyalty? This guy has a spotless record, fucks up once in an extreme situation, and they fire him.
He was fired not for the situation, but because of his actions at the disciplinary hearing that came afterwards. Now remember, this man had been groomed since he was a child into this belief system. So when the Great Ape Escape happened and the Simian flu followed right along, he thought for sure he was watching Dr. Zaius' prophecies come to life.
Okay.
In this hearing, he ranted and raved about the apocalypse, the prophecies of the Simian Scrolls, and the need to declare martial law on not just the state of California or even the country of the United States, but worldwide, as he claimed that mankind was entering its end days, and he was the only man with the right training to save it before it was too late.
And that's all you have to do if you want early retirement too.
And a one-way ticket to the psych ward. Yep. Which is what almost happened to McCullough. He had to be sedated and hospitalised when the hearing frenzy got too much. But with enough ape shit on their hands and fearing a civil rights legal battle holding him on the count of his beliefs, they released McCullough the next day and put him on leave pending further investigation. But in that regard, it was too late. McCullough had been a good colonel, a tough colonel, but a good one. He took care of his men and in turn they gave him their loyalty back. It was for that reason that he already had the numbers in regard to men willing to follow him, and while the rest of Apeology suffered, the guerrilla unit grew. More joining by the day as the pandemic began to rise, and the delusioned soldiers remembered their former colonel's preachings and prophecies.
It's kind of understandable for people who are already indoctrinated into apeology. I mean, they grew up hearing stories of a simian virus and an army of mentally evolved apes led by a chimp named Caesar. So to them, this is a prophecy come to life. It's the idiots that started to buy into all the pandemic conspiracies that drove me crazy.
Do you know what I realised at the time? The Irish have no conspiracy theories attached to the government. We see our government as being so incompetent with the general running of a small neutral country that we can't imagine them being able to organise themselves to create some secret society or some massive cover-up.
Ooh, who would be in the Irish Illuminati?
Well, you know Bono's at the head of it. Bertie Ahern, Roy Keane, Louis Walsh, Boyzone, Westlife, Leo Varadkar, Jedward, and Dana.
Oh, and what's her name? The other Eurovision one, Linda. Linda. Gone for me. Probably not so. There you go. We just started the first Irish conspiracy. Spread it around.
And Linda isn't in it.
What the fuck is her
Twink should be
name?
in it though.
Don't twink, absolutely. Linda. Oh.
So this would be the conspiracy of the weakest chapter of the Illuminati ever. And no one outside of Ireland knows who that is. Irish people are more worried about the US or global conspiracy. Almost like we've accepted that we're a puppet country to the superpowers of the world. Not that it would have mattered if Dr. Zaius and JW McCullough had been right.
So with Calumet Island confiscated by the government and lockdown in full effect, where were these guys meeting to make their plans?
Well, directly after the Battle of the Golden Gate Bridge and his dismissal from the army, McCullough, who already had a small pocket of soldiers on his side and ready to desert their post to join him, set up camp in the Redwood Forest and began to hunt for the escaped apes. They spent about 90 days in there and found no apes, although again they came across Caesar's symbol and what looked to be man-made huts all over the forest. McCullough came to the conclusion pretty quickly that the apes had moved on, and he pulled his troops, leaving only a small company behind to continue to search the woods.
See, this muddies the water so much when it comes to figuring this mess out. How do we know these symbols and structures were made by the ALZ apes with these guys out there? They want to believe this threat exists so they can be justified in their actions and to build sympathy for their church. So how do we know these idiots aren't out there making evidence of smart apes? It could just be Apeologist's version of propaganda.
Could be. None of the escaped apes have been recaptured in the 4 years since the breakout. And the only thing researchers have to go on is the dead apes that were shot down by McCullough's army on day one. And it's hard to test the intelligence of a non-functioning brain, even harder if it's got a few bullets lodged in it. You spoke about the outbreak of the virus and the aftermath as being great for the Apeologists to gain sympathy, support, and even validation that their leaders had predicted all this decades beforehand. And in the hands of Zaius, it most definitely would have been used that way. But McCullough was all in on the doomsday rhetoric. He had been force-fed daily since his youth growing up in the church. So he decided it was time to build a real army with real outposts. And while Calumet Island was now in the hands of the US, the new militia group had sanctuaries spread all over the world, owned and ran exclusively by loyal and dedicated members of the church.
Shit, that's right. They have 88 sanctuaries all over the place. How do they treat the apes in the sanctuaries after the virus outbreak?
At first, they treated the apes the same as they had before, mainly to keep the chimp and gibbon classes of apeologists happy. I mean, they had all had to work in the sanctuaries all their life and had mainly followed Valentina Zaius' teachings, and they only got kind of pieces of her father's bigger picture. But it had been a few decades since Valentina had been dismissed and her most hardened followers left along with her. So while the sanctuaries continued to run as she set them up, you know, like these people were trained and taught her way of running the ape haven, but they were also taught how to be good practicing apeologists. Okay. McCullough understood this and realised it would take some time to convert these people fully to his plan of ape eradication.
I can imagine if some job in his hands if these people can get involved with the church because of their love of apes, then you can be sure they'd happily die for these animals. Like if he was thinking that the doomsday was coming and the prophecies were coming to life, then I can only imagine he wasn't going to be super patient with these people.
Like I said earlier, McCullough was in the position he was in because of his discipline and his temperament towards his followers. He knew how to build a loyal following, which was evident from his support from his fellow soldiers. Which was another factor in him treading lightly, as the vast majority of his militia were wanted men, all to be charged with desertion from the army upon apprehension. A charge which could see his whole army imprisoned for up to 5 years. 5 years McCullough didn't have.
So if he was treating everyone well and not harming the sanctuary apes, then how did it all go to shit in him?
It all went to shit near the end of 2020, just before Christmas, when both his wife Maggie and son John Jr. contracted the simian flu, both with a background of moderately bad asthma. They had it like I had it. It was bad when I was young, but it got, you know, as I got older, it faded. Yeah. I still get a bad cough sometimes in the winter, but no asthma attacks anymore. Yeah. Believing the US medical system was rigged and working with the government, who he believed were all well aware of the Simian Scrolls teachings and working towards the doomsday and apocalypse, McCullough refused to allow them to get outside help. As you know, at the time, the virus was at its most dangerous and hitting its highest mortality rates, so not a great idea. Yeah. It was for that reason that John Jr., or JJ as he was often called, got hit the hardest by the virus and began to struggle with breathing days before the first symptoms of the flu came to light. It's believed Maggie contracted it while taking care of her son, refusing to leave his side the whole time he was in isolation. Because of the amount of concern the parents had for JJ, Maggie's symptoms went under the radar, believing she was just run down. Maggie, who had said she had been feeling shitty, finally relented and went to her own isolated room for a rest. She went to her room and was found dead later that night. Autopsy would reveal that she had a massive asthma attack and died on December 23rd, 2020, around 9 p.m. She was discovered at 9:30 p.m. when JW went to inform her that her son had only passed away 5 minutes earlier from the same thing. Distraught and completely unhinged, McCullough ordered the execution of all the apes in the sanctuary and of any of the sanctuary workers who dared to try and intervene. He then passed the order worldwide to all sanctuaries owned and operated by Apeology. This order would see the mass murder of nearly 5,000 apes in one night.
So how did he have the soldiers in all these sanctuaries worldwide? Like, how does he pull this off?
He had some of the bigger international sanctuaries under militia guard, with military supporters popping up from their respective countries, So it wasn't just like a bunch from America. A few English ones would pop into the English, India, the Indian ones, that kind of way. But the vast majority of the ape genocide happened in the United States, Canada, and the UK, where the followings were strongest.
Surely this is enough to arrest him, though.
Any other time, yeah, definitely. But the first responders and the armed forces had their hands full with the general public in enforcing lockdown measures. The apes took a back seat to that. Also, no one was really clamouring to the front line when it came to facing down McCullough and his militia, when at this point he was only killing the cause of our current predicament.
But they're not the cause of the virus. It's a man-made virus. It's only labelled as the simian flu by media idiots that remembered it from their time covering Zaius in the news. As far as I've read, while it's believed that apes do seem to gain an intelligence when infected, they can't carry it the way we do. It sort of attacks their DNA and the way their brains work. They can spread it by procreation. Their body doesn't reject it like ours. It soaks the virus up and benefits from it, while we push it out through sneezing and coughing, essentially making it airborne, and its natural move is to find a new host to latch onto. Even if it's another human, the same thing will happen. If it's an ape, it will stick.
I don't know the science, and I'm sure if it was explained to me, I still wouldn't understand it. But the way you're talking, it sounds like we have been using the apes like bounty kitchen paper.
Nah.
That instead of blaming and destroying the apes, we should have had an ape in every home to soak up the virus into their system.
Yeah, I don't think it works like that, but I'm sure a lot of people would have given it a try during lockdown just to get back outside.
Fuck, if we had spread that around during the pandemic, we could have saved a lot of apes' lives from, what comes next.
Yep.
Because the apes in the sanctuary were dead before anyone could do anything to stop it, but what was yet to come was just as bad, if not worse.
Okay, it's honesty time. We have a confession to make. We suck at socials, no good at Insta, can't send a tweet or an X or whatever that super villain looking motherfucker is calling it now. Stick to your space cars, Elon. But we know you want to chat. You want to be kept updated. You want to be alive all the goddamn time. So we're getting down from the antisocial soapbox and giving this a try. So come chat to us on Insta and Twitter at AliveAlivePod, or hit us up by email at itsalivaalivepod@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. This is a project. It's still a work in progress, and we just want to give you more what you like and less of what you can't stand. So give us a like, give us a follow. We'll always hit you back, and we'll always try to reply to everyone. So come say hi. We don't bite. Well, at least Aimee doesn't. And she keeps me well fed, so you got nothing to worry about. Now, back to the show.
Now, McCullough was grieving, but realised that the shock of his actions would cause some unrest amongst his followers, and he knew that he would need the full support, and by support I mean funds, of the church and its followers. So McCullough retreated to a sanctuary the church had buried in the Olympic National Forest in Washington State. He spent 2 months there before he re-emerged to his followers with what was to be the first new translations from the now infamous Simian Scrolls. He claimed that when Zaius chose him as his successor, he taught him the language of the evolved ape, so that he could give the world the new prophecies when the time was right. He said the new prophecies showed the past, the present, and the future if we didn't act. The past was everything that led to the ALZ outbreak. This book was entitled The Rise. The second told of our present, and it was titled The Dawn. And the final book was of our supposed future, and that was called The War. Now, we've covered the past and the present of this story to date, so let's have a look at the future. First, as it was planned to happen in the war prophecy, and then how it really played out and tragically ended in April of 2021 after a 51-day standoff with the FBI, ATF, and a small division of the US top tactical military unit that was generally used for terrorist situations.
Hopefully they do a better job than they did in Waco. And if you want to know more about that, please check out this week's Mini Monsters for the extra long profile, and then check out Patreon's Real Monsters to hear us talk about it.
Good plug. And to answer your question, nah, this was just as bad as Waco, and the build-up was horrific. Like, McCullough wasn't digging up bodies for a resurrection duel or anything, but it was bad. To get that reference, do as Aimee said above and check out the rest of the horrorverse.
Yep.
First, McCullough put out the call for all followers to move to their nearest sanctuary and fortify the buildings. With smaller sanctuaries, they were to build camp around the areas as well, taking more land illegally and fortifying that too.
They must have had to take a lot of land to house them all.
Not really. The church was dying at this point. After Zaius passed, it was said that the membership fell to about 80,000 worldwide. The Ape Massacre and the Doomsday shit knocked that to 50, and the call to fortify the sanctuaries cost them another 20,000. So in the grand scheme of things, what's left wouldn't fill half a Croke Park or a third of Wembley Stadium, and those numbers were spread worldwide.
Okay.
So, not to mention at this point, celebs were backing off, costing the church millions a year and causing McCullough to up the church tax from 50 to 60% and then 75% of the followers' income. McCullough's main base of operations and the site of the eventual standoff was the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, where he moved upon completion and release of the latest prophecies. The conditions were fierce, especially in the winter, but that was by design, to make infiltration by enemy forces as difficult as possible. Even if a force was to come against them, they were a highly motivated, highly trained military unit, and they would know the terrain better than their enemies and be used to the severe weather conditions. From here, he directed his militia's special ape eradication unit, Exercitus Viri, in operations targeting apes around the world.
They're dicks, but the name sounds cool.
It literally translates to army man.
No, well, that's that down.
Using Exercitus Viri, he attacked and infiltrated zoos, sanctuaries, and research facilities around the country, using various methods such as bombings, hijackings, and breaking and entering to achieve his goal. In every circumstance, all apes were executed, whereas all humans were incapacitated and left tied up but alive. This again kept some of the heat off them, as they weren't committing out-and-out murder of man.
Just animal genocide.
Yeah. Eventually, though, one of the bombings went wrong and 3 men died trying to save the chimps, while 5 more were injured. Now, one thing I failed to mention is that obviously the Apeologists weren't claiming responsibility for the genocide. They claimed to have no affiliation to Exercitus Viri, these bastards, and claimed that it was a splinter cell of hardcore ex-followers and that they were not representing the church at large. And by they, I mean McCullough.
Yeah.
It took quite some time to finally get concrete evidence of the church's involvement with their group, although it was an open secret, like Sinn Féin and the IRA. They always claim to have no affiliation, but we know they do, and they know we know they do, but no one will admit to anything. Anyway, after the bombing that saw the first human fatalities in McCullough's war with the apes went wrong, and a handful of do you know what? I'm not saying it every time. A handful of Army Man members were arrested, and after a lot of time in interrogation rooms, one finally flipped, finally giving the FBI and ATF a reason to come knocking on McCullough's front door. But as I said, McCullough got word they were coming from an informant he had on the inside, and the soldiers in the Tongass forest were ready for the enemy. Fortified, in position, heavily armed with a huge stockpiles of weapons and ammo.
Again, reminiscent of Waco in 93.
Upon the ATF's entering of the property and failure to execute the search warrant, a siege was initiated by the FBI. McCullough ordered the compound in the forest to go into high alert lockdown, and over the space of the next few days, firefights between the militia and the Bureau erupted at even the slightest provocation from either side, meaning the FBI and ATF started as many of the shootouts as they suffered from their opposition. This shit went on for days until the government agencies realised they were outgunned, running low on ammunition, and at a massive disadvantage in terms of positioning. They didn't realise that McCullough, using connections made throughout his military career, along with the financial backing of one celeb that stayed by his side, had stockpiled more weapons and ammo than the two agencies opposing him had in their arsenal combined.
Who's the celebrity?
I'm not at liberty to say. He likes to sue when connected to all this. Needless to say, you may have seen him in many Hollywood blockbusters, and a quick Google search would reveal who he is. So maybe he should just sue Google and stop bothering everyone else with his mental, outdated Hollywood I'm a megastar bullshit.
Yep.
Either way, the McCullough-led militia were more than well armed and tucked away fairly comfortably inside the compound walls, as opposed to the enemy who were stuck out in the freezing woods.
I did a little bit of research while you were working on the main story, and I looked up on the layout of the compound. Because it was an ape sanctuary beforehand, it naturally had higher walls and built-in floodlights. It also had one watchtower in the centre of the grounds used to observe the apes around the grounds, but at this stage it was being used as a sniper's crow's nest. McCullough also added smaller watchtowers to each corner of the compound, which were decked out with a minigun turret-style weapons. There was a big building originally used for housing and working with the apes that was now McCullough's HQ, with a war room, his main quarters, meeting room, canteen and kitchen, armoury, and finally a gym. There had been one dorm building and an exercise area for the apes. That exercise area was halved and turned into a trading zone, with the other half housing additional dorms for the soldiers. They had razor-sharp barbed wire running along the tops of the main walls, and the outside were guarded by a handful of well-placed landmines.
On top of the landmine, snipers and minigun fire, they were known to just blindly fire grenades at the enemy as well. They weren't bothered if they hit them or not. It was just, they wanted to confuse them. Although I heard one ex-FBI agent talk about how he watched the militia try to herd a group of officers into a landmine, with the grenades.
Like, you throw the grenades in one place to make them run into the landmines as they try to get away from the grenade explosion.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Eventually, the shooting stopped and the injured needed to be accounted for. A negotiator by the name of Malcolm Alexander made direct contact with McCullough and tried to reason with him to allow his men get close to the compound walls, collect their dead and injured. Playing off his military upbringing and rules of engagement in war, he convinced McCullough to a ceasefire in return for the enemy camp retreating back to the forest edge and off of McCullough's newly claimed land. The federal agents begrudgingly agreed. From here, negotiations went back and forth, but no resolution could be made, as the only acceptable outcome to either side was completely irrational to the other. For the government agents, the only outcome was for McCullough and his army to surrender themselves peacefully, and in return they'd get a little time knocked off their prison sentences. For McCullough, that was the complete other end of the scale of compromise. He was thinking more along the lines of, we'll agree to cease military action if you fuck off out of our woods.
Huh.
He suggested that being as it was Alaska and off the mainland, that the United States should allow him and his people to secede from the United States and allow the Apeologists their own country away from the doomed ape world. America said no.
Yeah, no shit.
No, it wasn't all doom and gloom, and over time it seemed like negotiators were making a little headway. Though working with a pro like McCullough, even in this apocalypse frenzy, was no easy feat. He knew all the tricks, he used all the tricks himself, and he even helped invent one or two of the techniques that agents were trying to use against him. McCullough even returned in kind using huge speakers and the facility floodlights to boom sound and light at the agents 24 hours a day in order to cause sleep deprivation and madness. The frustration of the slow-moving siege would often boil over with the more action-oriented military anti-terrorism group acting out, firing the odd shot at the feet of the on-guard Exercitus Viri soldier, causing pockets of gunfire to break out and pushing negotiations back between the warring tribes.
Yeah, they're pissed the negotiations are taking so long, but at the same time, they're the reason the negotiations are taking so long. This whole case is proof we need better psych tests on people joining military or policing positions.
We could go on and on about the back and forths, but they were always very similar. One step forward, gunfight, 2 steps back. But on day 49, it seemed like a deal was close to being struck. The only condition was that Malcolm Alexander, the negotiator, would have to deliver the government documents with the deal in writing for McCullough to sign, and he would then walk back out with Alexander, who had promised to keep him safe and alive as he passed the very aggressive and angry, battered and bruised, pissed off and vengeful agents who had been stuck out there for nearly 2 months now.
What was the deal in the end?
McCullough agreed to take all the heat. His soldiers would only be detained for a year for deprogramming before returning to society, and the Apeology sanctuaries would remain under the church's possession to be repurposed for the religion's new churches. Also, he would get some perks in prison, and the death penalty was off the table.
They seemed to have the upper hand. Why did he give in?
Well, the thought was that he just had enough of being stuck in the compound with no sign of resolution coming, and that the deal was actually pretty good considering the ape genocide, the murder of federal agents, and the whole succession thing. Succession? Yeah, I don't know. Secession? I don't know. But judging by what happens next, my guess is the first one. Stuck in place with no resolution coming. Remember, this man 100% believes he is in the end times. So being stuck in place and having to focus on federal agents meant he couldn't deal with the impending ape attack. As far as he was concerned, as he watched the stats for the simian flu rise and the body count along with it, all hope was surely lost. It was for that reason we believe he did what he did next. Malcolm Alexander entered the compound at 10:45 a.m. the morning of May 19th. He was unarmed and entered alone with just the legal document in hand. An hour later, the document came back, but Malcolm didn't. On the dotted line in blood, the words, "fuck you," were written. The blood was that of Alexander's. He had been executed on entry. The negotiations were a sham, a technique used to stall the enemy while the message to followers was sent out. The message was short, simple, and to the point. Well, at least if you were one of the Apeologist soldiers. It read, "The world has fallen, all is lost. Follow me to Soror when you hear the news."
What does that mean?
It means he failed in his mission, the apes will inherit the world, and to follow me the Soror bit, considering that's where Zaius claimed to be when he died, is assumed to be follow me in death. On the 20th of May, as the agents prepared to gas and storm the compound after Alexander's blatant and cold-blooded murder, they heard a crackling come from the compound's massive speakers, followed by McCullough's voice. He simply said 2 words, which was followed by a quick but extremely loud sound of many guns all going off at once. The agents froze, and quickly everyone checked to see, but no one was injured, no one was hit. The words McCullough said was believed to be a code word. He simply said, "Go bananas." The gunshots were the collective sound of the soldiers shooting himself in the head. McCullough was believed to be the last to go. For about an hour after, someone roamed the compound, firing an odd shot here and there. This was believed to be McCullough picking off survivors or men who pulled out of the suicide order. After the last shot rang out and a flash was seen from McCullough's quarters, the agents entered the compound, where they found his body was the only one left in the room. Sat at the head of his war room table, his full Apeologist military gear and medals on, the Exorcitus Vitae and Apeology flags draped behind him, fragments of his brains dripping from the cloth. As news hit the mainstream, the actions of this group began to be repeated worldwide, with many, many Apeologists dying by suicide within the next few days. The final number is somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 deaths related to this event in the first week alone. The deaths related to this cult continue to this day.
That's a lot of deaths.
Yep. But thankfully, the religion of Apeology has shrunk over the years to the point where only a few pockets of followers still exist around the world. The sanctuaries, although at first returned to the church, were won in a court battle by Valentina and Vitus Zaius and returned to the purpose they were originally meant for. The siege and the long build-up to it has led to many government debates, not just in the States but worldwide, when it comes to the regulations, criteria and perks that come from being a religious entity. Cult followings are now watched with a closer eye, but unfortunately for them, human rights in most constitutions give people the right to hold whatever beliefs they wish. So preventing a repeat of Apeology or similar groups from rising to the top is impossible. What we do know is it's been 4 years since the pandemic consumed our world and since we last saw the great woke apes of San Francisco. Are they out there plotting our downfall, or are they just living, waiting for us to destroy ourselves so they can step into our place? Only time will tell. Until then, you know what to do. Follow us on all socials at Alive Alive Pod and check out our Patreon at It's Alive Alive Pod for great shows like our mini monster companion show, Real Monsters, and Aimee Rose's horrific history podcast, Playing with Bones, along with classic episodes of Behind the Mask and classic Real Monsters. All that and early access to the whole weeks of mini monsters every Monday.
All that, and you get ad-free access to our main show and the weekend update, all for just $5 a month. That's on Patreon at It's Alive Alive Pod. And now, first 7 days are free, so it costs you nothing to go check it out.
We'll be back next Wednesday with more tales from the Horrorverse. It's Alive Alive Podcast, all the guts and gore, none of the guilt. See you all next time, same Alive Alive time, same Horrorverse channel. Okay, love you, bye-bye.